her esteemed colleagues, Jessica Boyne and Alberto Voci. They're doing super interesting research and relevant research, pushing intergroup contact theory forward, really exploring its boundaries. And today she'll take us on an adventure. She shared with me her economic approach to doing research. So Giulia always has a few safe projects, and at the same time one big high-risk, high-gain project. And I had the privilege to be involved in one of the high-risk projects. It was a lot of fun. We have very interesting results, and I'll give Giulia the floor to talk to you about it.
Okay, thank you, Jasper. Thanks to BrIAS for the opportunity. So we are going to the, I would say, intrapsychic side of the talks today. I'm a social psychologist, and I'm talking about deprovincialization. So deprovincialization is a very long word, but it is very easy to understand if we split it in two. You have a D, so you get rid of provincialism, which means that you get rid of your centering in one small words and your feelings of threat when you are within new experiences, such as encounters with the other groups, which is the outgroup. So to know about deprovincialization, I always suggest a nice review by Verkoiten and other colleagues. But the concept was first introduced by Thomas Pettigrew in the 90s. So it is kind of old, but the operationalization are innovative and mostly new. So deprovincialization overall is a worldview characterized by two facets, two sides. One is the belief that the culture and the norms of the ingroup, so one's group, one's community, are not the only legitimate ones. And this entails an idea of reduced ethnocentrism and reduced in-group centrism without disparaging one's group. So it is actually not a negative view of your group, just an attenuated view of the merits of your group. And the second part of deprovincialization is the other-oriented part, so curiosity and openness, acceptance toward the other groups and cultures. So it is a process. It means, in psychology, it means that we have a certain level of deprovincialization, all of us, but we can also work through it and increase it maybe through interventions. So how can we achieve deprovincialization? One way is to engage in contact with the other groups. This comes from the old theory by Pettigrew. So interacting with members of different social groups makes us more open-minded, okay? And the second thing we need to deprovincialize ourselves is a cognitive reframing of our views. So, we know that positive contact with the outgroup is a good way to achieve deprovincialization, but we really need the cognitive part. So to change our mind, okay, to open our mind and to think of outgroups in different ways. Okay, so at this point, social psychologists will say, great, this is a nice tool to fight prejudice and negative attitudes toward the outgroup, but you may be a broader audience, so let's try to think of it in a broader way. We can take one step more and imagine that deprovincialization has some mechanisms that can help attenuate overall sociocultural tensions, okay? So we know that two mechanisms of deprovincialization are relativizing the norms and cultures, okay, and accepting pluralism, and this can lead to reduced cultural polarization. Two other mechanisms of deprovincialization are achieving a greater cognitive and moral openness and having a more flexible understanding of one's identity, and this can help us reduce identity polarization. So the idea of a specific us versus them which in social psychology we also call categorization. I have some water? No. Okay, I will go on. Okay, so at the beginning we said that... no, I can take my bottle. Just 1 second. Okay, so at the beginning we said that the deprovincialization has two sides. One is the abandonment of an in-group-centric perspective. One is the openness toward an acceptance of different cultures and groups. And to portray these two different sides, we have two different labels and two different validated scales. So one is group deprovincialization, which captures the in-group side a bit more, and then we have cultural deprovincialization. I am one of the authors who validated the scale, which captures the more out-group-oriented side of deprovincialization. Both scales are validated. They tap quite well into the two sides of deprovincialization. In fact, these are some items. I'm not gonna show you the entire scales. They are actually very short. So one has 4, the other has 6 items. They are on Likert type agreement scales, very easy to use, very easy to translate. Okay, so these are the measures we have, and today I'm gonna present you a bunch, I would say a collection of different results from 3 different papers in which we use both sides of deprovincialization with different approaches. So first I'll let you show you what is the position of deprovincialization in a network of out-group experiences and social attitudes employing network analysis with cross-sectional self-report data. Second, this is a paper with slightly different aims, but it still has deprovincialization, so we will focus on that to understand what is the typical profile of highly deprovincialized people, so taking a person-centered approach. And third, we go to the experimental side of deprovincialization. We try to understand if it is possible to train it, so to increase the level of deprovincialization, and what happens if we train it. I mean, do we have some effects on behavioral intentions and attitudes? We are going to discover this. Okay, so part 1. So for those of you who already know network analysis, you may know it is very descriptive. So we are just putting together a selection of variables to understand how they are all related to each other simultaneously. I'm going to portray a simple network analysis, but I did the same with exploratory graph analysis, which uses the actual location and the map is the same. So you can evaluate the relationships based on both the numbers, so the correlation coefficients, and the location in the network. So the variables I'm including are both cultural and group deprovincialization, positive and negative contact with the outgroup. In this case, we have immigrants. In many cases, we actually have immigrants as outgroup in social psychology. I'm including 2 very famous orientation to capture, I would say, the socio-political preferences of people. Okay, one is right-wing authoritarianism, which captures preference for authority, tradition, and conformity. The second one is a social dominance orientation. It captures preference for hierarchical group inequality, so that the groups remain different and distant in terms of power. And I also have some psychological variable. One is dispositional curiosity, to understand if deprovincialization is really part of something that is related to broader open-mindedness. And second, I have anxiety and prejudice toward the outgroup, so the more emotional and cognitive side of outgroup experience. Okay, so the circles, the nodes are the variables, the edges are the relationship among the variables. So we can C. Oh, and reddish dashed edges are negative links, and the green solid edges are positive links. You see it from the numbers as well. So the interesting thing here is that if we compare cultural and group deprovincialization, they are very, very strongly correlated with each other. I know the number is not that high, but you have to take into account the fact that it is a partial correlation of everything with everything. So the number is pretty high. So the two sides of deprovincialization are very correlated with each other, but they are parts of two different sides. If you look at group deprovincialization, that is closer to social dominance orientation and right-wing authoritarianism. So it captures more the socio-political side of this process. On the other hand, if we look at cultural deprovincialization, it is closer to outgroup experiences and attitudes and curiosity as well. So it captures more the openness and experiential, I would say, side of the deprovincialization process. So overall, both types of deprovincialization are forms of cognitive and cultural openness, but they are tapping into two different nuances. So going to the second part of this collection of results, with a completely different sample, we also used latent profile analysis to understand whether highly deprovincialized people also had a particular profile on, again, similar sociocultural but also cognitive variables. We included, again, the two types of deprovincialization. You already know social dominance orientation. We also added beliefs related to diversity, so how much one is open toward diversity and has pro-diversity beliefs, and some cognitive variables. Some of them are quite similar, but we really wanted to capture different nuances, so we have different facets of curiosity. We have cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to adapt thinking and behavior in response to changing situation. I know this is very psychological, so maybe not everything is clear now, but I can explain if something looks a bit unclear. So we have different sides of curiosity because we wanted to consider both the intrinsic motivation to seek out new experiences, which is the exploration part, but also how much one can engage with uncertainty and ambiguity, which is the tolerance to stress, and similar to that, we have the need for structure. So we wanted to understand how much deprovincialized people are really able to stay with the unknown. I mean, live with the unknown, the ambiguous, that is the part of intergroup experiences that most of the times threatens us in a psychological sense, okay? Okay, so the latent profile analysis, well, we tried to select a solution that was parsimonious as well as descriptive of our data. And we came up with a three-class solution. The labels have been called this way due to the aims of the paper. So the labels could seem weird a bit, but let me pass this. There's a reason why. So class 3 was the overall liberal class. I'm going to portray a description in the next slide. So just to give you a first look, we didn't have much difference on the need for structure scale, but all other variables were statistically significant in the differences among the profiles. So the three profiles really captured different types of individuals. So what we observed is that we had one class, which was socio-cognitive liberalization, which had high deprovincialization, high openness to experience and to multiple perspectives, so a broad cognitive openness, okay, and flexibility, but also a very positive approach to diversity and egalitarian attitudes. So openness from both the cognitive and the socio-cultural side. In the second profile, we called it cognitive rigidity because we observed high openness to diversity and low social dominance orientation, but participants had very low scores on dimensions of cognitive openness and cognitive flexibility. And interestingly, they also had medium deprovincialization. This means that to be a highly deprovincialized people, you really need to endorse pro-diversity, pro-outgroup beliefs, but you also need a cognitive change. So you really need to have flexible cognitive schemas to accept the new, to accept the difference, okay? And lastly, we had the smallest class was the anti-liberalization profile, which had low scores on both sides of deprovincialization and on all the dimensions of cognitive and socio-cultural openness. So it was pretty clear to us that to be highly deprovincialized, you really need some sort of cognitive change. Okay, maybe I can just go very fast through these. There was also a secondary aim of the paper and was to compare the outgroup experiences across different classes. And we also saw that people in the socio-cognitive liberalization profile, so the highly deprovincialized people, were people with the best experiences with the outgroup. So less negative, more positive. They were really positively oriented toward people from different groups. Okay, last part. So at some point we thought, okay, this is nice, but we need something more causal, or maybe we just want to understand whether we can act on deprovincialization and if deprovincialization really can make a change for behavioral intentions, okay, so for behavior in society. And we designed some experimental manipulations on both cultural and group deprovincialization to see the effects on national identification, so how much one identify with one's outgroup, in this case the country, and to see the effects on collective action. Now, collective action is very important for psychology because solidarity-based collective action includes all the possible forms of behavior oriented toward the improvement of the conditions of the outgroup. So when you sign a petition, when you go out in the streets for a march for a certain group, that's collective action. It can be normative, so within the legal system, it can be non-normative if you engage in actions that are actually not accepted by your country. This is very important because it is one of the few actions that the ingroup can really take to protect the outgroup, okay? So we wanted to see whether inducing deprovincialization had an effect on this. So to induce deprovincialization, we created kind of short 2.5 minutes audio clips with reflecting writing task to do after the clip. So participants listened to the clip. It was kind of a guided meditation, but with a social focus, I would say. So for group deprovincialization, the focus of the audio clip was on relativism of in-group values. So your in-group values, yes, they are important, but they are only one of the options that exists in the real world. While the audio clip on cultural deprovincialization was focusing on the value in learning about cultural diversity, so more about the outgroups. We also had a combined cultural and group deprovincialization manipulation with integrated sections of both the other two with counterbalanced order. And we have an active control condition with the description of an urban landscape. So participants were randomly assigned to one of the 4 conditions, and we also have manipulation and attention checks. I'm not bothering you with those. And the dependent variables were, so national identification measured with the iOS scale. This is also a very psychological scale with pictures, and the more you select pictures that are circles that are overlapping, the more you think that you overlap with your, you belong to your outgroup, I would say. You identify with your, with your ingroup. You identify with your ingroup, so in this case, the ingroup was Italians. So the more they selected overlapping circles, the more they felt identified with the Italian group. And the other dependent variables were normative and non-normative collective action. They are, you can find example items here. So normative if you are within the legal system, non-normative if you are taking actions that are not legal. They are very classical measures of collective action. We also added in-group-centered and out-group-centered collective action, which is kind of a news in the literature. So the idea of having in-group and out-group-centered collective action is to disentangle if you want to be sure that you're not having privilege, this is in-group-centered collective action, or you want to be sure that the out-group has access to opportunities, okay? So one is on the conditions of the in-group, the other one is on the conditions of the out-group. These are really slight nuances. Okay, and these are simple mean comparisons with Taki-adjusted contrasts for multiple comparisons, and we saw that we observed some differences for national identification, meaning that respondents assigned to either the cultural or the group deprovincialization manipulation reported lower national identification compared to the control condition. And we also saw that in-group-centered collective action was higher for all the types of manipulation compared to the control condition. And we also had some difference for out-group-centered collective action between the integrated, so cultural and group deprovincialization manipulation condition and the control condition. When you see the bold numbers, they are statistically significant contrasts, and the different colors are really for the difference. On the other hand, we didn't have any effect of normative and non-normative collective action, so we might want to understand that maybe with other studies. Even though this study is already a part of a 3-study paper and we have cross-sectional results basically finding similar patterns before this experimental test. Okay, so overall, so taking into account both descriptive and experimental results, we could say that deprovincialization is part of a network composed of liberal attitudes, curiosity, and overall positive experiences with the outgroup. We can say that deprovincialization, when we take a person-centered approach, it appears accompanied by many forms of cognitive and cultural openness. Deprovincialization could be trained, we are still trying to understand that, and then be part of prejudice reduction interventions or other potential psychological intervention as a tool to foster collective action and intergroup solidarity. Thank you. Well, thanks to BrIAS in general and to my amazing co-authors involved in all these studies. They were really helpful, and yeah. So thank you.
Hi, thank you for the interesting presentation. I'm also coming from social psychology, but in the Netherlands. And for us, social identity theory is obviously very impactful. So I'm wondering how you kind of position this deprovincialization work in relation to the social identity research.
Yeah, this is a very nice question because I didn't explain it, but there is actually a very there is a strong relationship between social identity and group deprovincialization. This is why I was going to the very first slides. In fact, before these scales were built, these first forms of group deprovincializations were measured in many ways, and sometimes it was identification with the ingroup, sometimes it was the level of identity you take. For instance, again, this is a very social psychology thing, but if you think of yourself as part of a broader ingroup, okay, so let's say humans, speaking about social identity, but taking a very high level, that is very much related to group deprovincialization, because if you feel that you are part of a higher order identity, higher order group, you tend to attenuate the value of your small in-group values. So yes, it is. Yeah, that's very important to that part.
And then I guess as a little follow-up, with the training, how can you distinguish between having primed the superordinate group versus actually training them to be more open?
Well, I think that there is still a difference, because if we prime the superordinate identity, we are imposing the cognitive idea of an identity that is on a higher level. But if we train group deprovincialization, we are not asking them to think of a larger group, but only to put their in-group perspective, their in-group values in perspective with all the others. So I would say we are skipping the identity part and try to let them think that their in-group is just one of their values, their cultural values are just one of the many possibilities. So in some sense, we are avoiding the group belonging, I would say. Okay.
Thank you. I hope I understood enough of this. I think that certain things are just named different. I mean, I come from political science. They are named slightly differently, but they are somewhat the same.
It is.
So I have actually 3 questions. And one is following up on social identity theory, which has been lately super successful in political science. And now it's really good that you're saying on this slide, and now you also talked about these higher level identities. Mm-hmm. And I think that the first thing that in political science we learn when we look into social identity theory is that there is the need for positive identification, so the in-group, but there is also a need of differentiation. So for saying, okay, I am this and I am not that. So I think social identity theory has these 2 components, and that's why it's been very successful in political science, because they're both very important, right? And I wondered here in how far you go into measuring the differentiation, right? Because you have it's this very nice measurement that I think we can completely borrow, steal, whatever, on with the
maybe with
consent
while citing.
Yeah. I really wonder in how far there is this the ordering, right? It's taken into account, because you can think the differentiation is still very important in these processes, even though I understand maybe from this perspective it is a bit less. The second question, well, now I forgot. The second question was about, I'll go to the third one. So you call deprovincializations what I think in political science we would call the depolarization, right? And I really wonder and you have this ingroup centrism, in how far you can depolarize or deprovincialize somebody who was what in political science I would call a very high salience for a positive identity, right? If I am attached to an idea of me and my group being, I don't know, Christians, white, whatever. I'm thinking of all the political discourse of the far right, for example, right, of the Christian roots, the cultural Christian roots of Europe. This has a lot to do with the way we look at, for example, migrant and all the discourse on Islamophobia. And I really wonder how you take into account the salience of identity in a design like this in social psychology.
We should measure it. So first, that's the answer. And I think that the point here is that you talked a lot about the positive differentiation, no? So the fact that you want to preserve your identity that is different, but it must also be a positive one, right? So the idea of group deprovincialization is really to have a balanced view on identities, so that you are able to say, I like my identity, I love my group, I belong to it, I'm attached to it, but I understand that in the world, everybody has his or her own group and identity, and everybody has the right to express their ideas that follow their group, because everybody has their histories, and so it is really about pluralism, I would say. So you're not disparaging your group, you're not saying, it could be bad. You're not acknowledging the fact that your views maybe have some issues or potential drawbacks. It is really about being simultaneously positive about one's belongings, but also understanding that there are other many belongings and identities that have the right to exist. So it is really about legitimacy.
I have a follow-up question. Yes. Threats. As a psychologist, you should. I imagine you're way more familiar with me than with the concept. So how this relates to the perception of threats, because I can recognize that you are different from me, and I accept that as long as you stay the hell away from me. Otherwise, vicinity. You come right. I'm thinking again of Islamophobia could be a potential threat to me.
And this is why we also usually measure intergroup contact with deprovincialization, because that's really, I would say, like the behavioral part. At some point, you also need to live with not only accept that their views are legitimate, but you also need to live with other people. So it is always good to understand whether these are people who also enjoy being with the outgroup. And in most of the cases, with highly deprovincialized people, yes, from the latent profile analysis, but maybe we can dig a little bit deeper on this. And I think that the threat idea, that's really the core. Deprovincialization is really about not being threatened. So you really captured, I think, the core of the process, because deprovincialization is really about not being threatened by the others' identities and ideas, and thinking that everybody can coexist, even though we can fear a bit, we can have sometimes negative feelings, but we can work through it, understand that, again, everybody has the right to be different and have different views. So I think that the threat is really the core.
It's my turn. Hi.
Hi.
So I'm also a social psychologist. Thank you so much for the presentation. I also had two questions related to social identity, to be original. The first one was on the second study, the experimental study. So you measure the quantity of kind of like the identification to the national, to the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering to what extent training to deprovincialization is not about changing also the content of the national identity. Being like, I'm proud to identify and belonging to a country that's like open and like in the acceptance of like other culture, nationalities, etc. So that's my first question. Is it not more about the qualitative, the content of the identity rather than the strength of the identification? And the second one is about the dual identity. Is it not? So basically, in the common in-group model that you probably refer to, saying that when you answered the first question, I think, saying that like when you identify with the humanity, and then there's like less intergroup conflicts and stuff like that. But there's also literature on a dual identity, saying basically, to what I understand, I have my culture, my in-group, my country that exists in a world, in the humanity with like other countries, culture, etc. So I'm wondering whether there's a link between the idea of like, okay, I identify to the like the subordinate group, which is the national identity, but also to the humanity. Then I see that like every culture is the same, and it also could relate to the perception of threats. Because if you don't feel recognized, if you don't feel like the culture and the identity of your country is recognized, then maybe the dual identity and the deprovincialization is not working. I don't know if it's clear.
Okay, these are very interesting points. So the first one was about... Yeah, I think it is really, I think that the content changes because it is, I mean, if you deprovincialize, you relate to your group, your identities in a different way. So yes, it could be that content that changes, especially if you can think of your group as a group that is more open and so on. So yes, that could work. Well, if you have a group that is open, I mean, if you can reach that content, that would, I think that could work. And for the dual identity part, so you thought of double identity in terms of both like the in-group national one and the higher order one, right? Okay. So ideally, it could work, having a dual identity could work very well. The problem is that sometimes people have a dual identity, but in that in the higher order identity, sometimes not all the groups are really included. I don't know if I'm clear when I say this. One can say, oh yeah, I'm very, I don't know, I'm very human. I believe that all of us should be equal and treated in the same way, but then you measure attitudes toward a very despised group, and at some point you discover they have prejudice. So yes, I mean, one should really focus into that and see if the dual identity translates into openness toward all the group, especially despised groups that are seen negatively in society, I would say.
Thank you. I have a very simple question. After the deprovincialization, would you promote about contents and values a melting pot or a big salad?
A melting pot of?
A big salad.
Okay. You mean a big salad of people?
Yes, of groups. I mean, in which every group would keep the values, the contents, its own values, or a big melting pot, or you have this kind of big mix of whatever we have.
So, you said simple question. I was expecting a simple one. Okay. Traditionally, intergroup contact theory says that when you mix people from different groups together, you always have, if they have positive encounters, okay, you always have positive consequences for intergroup relations. So basically, at some point, they know each other a bit more. But the most important thing is that besides knowing each other, they share experiences, and especially their emotions toward other groups start to change. So they become more empathetic toward the outgroup, but especially they feel less anxious. And this is related to threat, as we were saying before. So the theoretical answer would be, yes, it is good to mix many people together from different groups, because if you mix people together, they meet a lot, and their anxiety in the intergroup encounters diminish, okay? And by diminishing those negative emotions, intergroup relations become more harmonious. So this would be the theoretical answer. If I have to say, it really depends on the outgroups and the relations they have. What are the conflicts? Do they have a problem, like, do they share territory? Do they fight for something? Have these outgroups similar interests? Are they in a competitive relationship? That changes everything. So if we mix everything in a salad, we have to be sure that all the flavors combine in a good way.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay.
I was just wondering if you're planning to, or did you check to apply it on political polarization? Because what I'm thinking, like people in the opposing political ideas, they are still in the same group. So yeah, they share the same group identity, but then they have different values.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I really would like to do that. In fact, when I got at the end of this presentation and I understood that, in fact, maybe many of you were not social psychologists, I thought it is a pity that we didn't include many variables that could be interesting for political sciences, and we do not even have political orientation. But I think that, well, maybe we can chat later, but I think it could be very, very interesting to go on that side and try to understand what happens from that perspective. I don't know, do you have suggestions? Would you have liked to?
I'm actually also from social psychology. I was just wondering.
Okay. I thought,
if what would you expect from your results?
What do I expect?
Yeah. Do you expect to have the same processes, that it also fosters a bit more openness?
Yeah, I would expect similar results. But maybe there could be some resistance. I don't know if you, depending on the beliefs. So maybe I would expect similar patterns, but maybe not everything would be so simple, especially if we have to train it.
I was thinking if I can just jump in, because I had a question precisely about that for your third study. And in that respect, actually, I was wondering a bit about the external validity of your sample. Because, I mean, on some of these samples, you have quite a lot of students. But I don't know if that also applies to the third study, the one about collective action. Because there, for instance, I mean, we know that in terms of engagement, I mean, that changes a lot across age cohorts. And then, since you mentioned left-right political orientation, you're studying this in Italy among Italian people with respect to Arabs in a context of unprecedented criminalization of collective action by state authorities. So in that respect, you may do, I mean, we already know left and right in terms of collective action that changes, but there may also be quite a lot of contextual factors playing in.
I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree. So about the sample, most of the times, well, first they are all convenient sample. I don't know if I mentioned before, but most of the times our samples are half composed of university students and the other half of other people. In this case, I don't have the percentages, but the sample is older, so we actually have a bit more respondents from the general population, so they are not all of them are students. We usually try to exclude psychology students only because they are more sensitive to the measure, so this is something that can be important. But you are right. In fact, I wasn't really, I mean, the choice of the outgroup was also not my choice, I would say. And I think that it is a very specific outgroup that maybe people have problems with in terms of cultural clashes about religion, but it is different from rights, the rights you want to support. Even though we kind of have some fight for the rights to engage in religious acts, of have religious places within workplaces. So I would say there are some cases in which this is relevant, but maybe it is not the most, maybe it is a situation that still appears safe. A type of collective action that still appears safe in Italy, yes. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
I mean, I think some of these things you cannot control for in this sample. Of course, it would have been interesting to see if you change the condition, pretty much like Bruno was doing in his research, and then you change Arabs with another minority and you see whether that plays in, because the Arabs are a quite extreme case of outgroup for some category of people. And if you go left-right, clearly on the right, they are considered more outgroup than other migrant minorities in Europe. So, but of course, you cannot do it with this study.
No, but we can. No, but maybe I can propose to my co-authors to go on with other studies and try different types of outgroups and different types of. Yeah, we can keep the measures, but try with different contexts and understand if something changes. But I agree. And we should have controlled, I think, for more attitudinal and political variables at some point. We really wanted to keep the questionnaire short, also because we pre-registered. And when you pre-register, you kind of like select what you really expect, and we didn't want to go too far with the hypothesis, but you're right.
Are there other questions? Also, if you still have questions for the first presenter, don't hesitate to jump in. Anyone?
Thank you. Just to follow back on our previous exchange, if you go on the route of dual identity, maybe what could happen based on what you were saying is in-group projection. So basically, okay, we belong to the same humanity, but as long as you look like me and have the same culture as me, so maybe you could also control for that in a follow-up study, because obviously that would work if people were like not into competition, to be like, okay, but we are all humans, but my culture is more human than yours, something like that. Maybe that would kind of moderate or like prevent some people to actually be trained to think like that.
You know, this is very interesting because it would be a completely different paper, I think. Meaning that at some point we could dig into the relationship between the types of identities and deprovincialization. Because when we, if you train deprovincialization and you don't really mention identity, you are kind of leaving the group belonging aside, which in one way is good, because if you don't talk about the group, usually people are not aware of it. I don't know. To really be aware of the identity, you need some sort of intergroup situation, usually. It's not like everybody walks in the street to think about their group belongings. Okay. So as you need to be aware of group membership, otherwise it's not always salient. It could be good to understand what happens if both things are salient at the same time. So in this case, we really don't have any identity salient, and it is a choice. But yeah, in a future paper, maybe we could try to see the relationships and see maybe if a dual identity helps, for instance, group deprovincialization. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. And I have a curiosity.
I can hear, actually.
You can
okay.
hear me? Okay. I don't know if you can hear better, but I was wondering, do you think that on top of the cultural factor and the idea of cultural openness, there's also, however we want to put it, a class or a socio-economic element as well? That is, I'm not sure how you could include that in the design, maybe of future studies, but I have an intuition that maybe that might play a role also in explaining. I mean, are people more open and tolerant towards groups of other cultures if they share a similar class background, or not? I assume that it could play a role, so that maybe just something to integrate in future studies.
Yeah, I think so. You really talk about social class, right?
Yes.
But when you talk about social class, maybe you also mean that they share the similar experiences and spaces.
Exactly.
Yes, and that would also relate. To within or intergroup contact as well. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that would be one way to connect. In fact, again, it is related to identity, because we have maybe an identity of one identity on some level, but we have different groups' identities that make us closer, even if we are different on other levels. Yes, very good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We still have some time, so do not hesitate. Otherwise, this has been a particularly long session, so we can also conclude a bit early. But thank you to both speakers, and thank you for everyone in attendance.
Thank you.